When I finally decided to share my story, I had already begun to unravel what was left of my life. It all started with a simple suspicion, which grew into an unbearable sense of unease. That night, after my first post, I realised I couldn't keep ignoring the doubts that haunted me daily. My heart was torn between fear of the truth and the hope that it was all just my imagination. The next day, almost on a whim, I suggested to my husband that we take a weekend getaway, just the two of us, away from everything. No distractions, no work, and most importantly, no phones. He agreed. We went to a small cabin in the mountains where cell service was practically non-existent. I had chosen this place on purpose, ensuring we wouldn't be tempted to look at our phones. I knew that if I wanted an honest conversation, I needed his full attention. The first night went perfectly. We laughed, reminisced about old times, and for a brief moment, I almost forgot all my worries. It felt like everything was normal, even wonderful. For a while, I genuinely believed my fears were unfounded. Maybe I'd just been overthinking. But the next morning, a strange silence hung in the air. He was unusually quiet, and his gaze seemed distant, almost vacant. This heaviness filled the room, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. As we made breakfast, he barely spoke, lost in his thoughts. I suggested we take a walk down to the lake, hoping a change of scenery might ease the tension. Our walk led us to a quiet spot by the lake, where large rocks lined the shore. We both sat on one of them, side by side, enveloped in a silence that felt endless. My heart was pounding and I couldn't bring myself to speak. We just sat there, staring at the stillness of the water, as if the lake held the answers to all my questions. Finally, I gathered the courage to break the silence, my voice barely a whisper as I asked about my sister and the strange feelings I'd had about them. My words trembled in the air, as if they might shatter the fragile hope that this was all just my imagination, but as soon as I mentioned her name, his face went pale. At that moment, I knew. Everything I feared was real. He didn't try to deny it or deflect my questions as I'd half expected. Instead, he took a deep breath, as though bracing himself for something inevitable. And then he spoke the words that shattered me. He admitted that he had fallen in love with my sister. Each word hung in the air, heavy and devastating. He explained that it started with their friendship at work, spending more time together than we did at home. They grew close because of everything they had in common. According to him, he felt he could truly be himself with her, talk about anything and never feel drained. As he continued, my mind was reeling. Then he dropped another bombshell. He told me that being with her made him feel alive in a way he never felt with me. He confessed that their physical relationship had started in October, but the emotional connection began over the summer, soon after they started working together. His words were tearing me apart. It felt as if I were in another world, where reality was cruel and unrelenting. He looked at me with a mixture of guilt and sorrow, apologising for hurting me and deceiving me. But his apology felt empty, void of any comfort or meaning. I was terrified to ask my next question, but I knew that if I didn't, I'd be haunted by it for the rest of my life. Gathering the last remnants of my strength, I asked him what he intended to do now. His answer came as another blow, each word hitting me like a hammer. He said as gently as he could that he had to be honest, even if it would break my heart. "I don't love you anymore," he admitted, as if delivering a final verdict. Each syllable felt like it was tearing my heart apart, shattering whatever hope I had left. But he didn't stop there. The most painful thing I've ever heard in my life followed. He said that his feelings for her had made him realise he'd never felt that way about me, not even in our best moments together. His confession was like a torrent of icy water drowning me in anguish. He continued, explaining that his love for her was different, incomparable to anything he'd ever felt for me, and he didn't feel right staying in a marriage he now saw as hollow. I sat there, numb. It was like the air around me had thickened, suffocating me. My heart felt like it was caving in, and I thought I might collapse right there on that rock. Everything we'd built, every moment we'd shared, now seemed like a lie. We both knew it was over. No more words were necessary. I couldn't find any strength left to hold on to a man who'd made it clear he'd never truly loved me, and as much as it broke me, I knew he was right. Staying together didn't make sense anymore. The hardest part was realizing that while my world was falling apart, he was already planning a life with her. His mind wasn't on saving our marriage, it was focused on a new beginning with my own sister. We agreed that our separation was final, and he promised to leave once we settled everything. But in that moment, I felt like a ghost in the house that used to be ours. When we returned home, it no longer felt like a place of comfort and safety. It was now just a hollow space, filled with memories that stung like open wounds. We began the process of dividing our lives, as if we were nothing more than roommates splitting up belongings. He offered to let me keep the house, but the thought of staying in a place haunted by our past was unbearable. I told him I didn't want it. I couldn't live in a place that would constantly remind me of his betrayal. We agreed to sell the house, and he even offered me the full amount from the sale, perhaps as a way to ease his guilt, but no amount of money could heal the pain he'd caused. I started packing, putting pieces of our life into boxes, as though I were packing away fragments of my broken heart. Each box felt like a painful reminder of everything I had lost, but as I struggled to move on, my sister's actions only twisted the knife deeper. She didn't try to hide her triumph, she flaunted it. Soon after our decision to separate, she sent me a photo, as if mocking my pain. In the picture, she was wrapped in his arms, grinning with the satisfaction of someone who believed she'd won. She went further, making that photo her profile picture. Her social media filled with images and videos of them together, some taken months ago when they were still hiding their affair. It was unbearable. Each post was a new wound, a reminder of the betrayal I couldn't escape. I asked him to speak with her, to ask her to stop publicly flaunting their relationship. He promised he would, but nothing changed. I realised then that I was trapped in a nightmare where my own sister had turned my pain into her trophy. But the worst was yet to come. My own family, the people who should have been my support, divided themselves, leaving me isolated in this tragedy. My mother, the person I'd always relied on, took my sister's side. She said my sister wasn't doing it to hurt me, that she deserved to be happy. Her words felt like a slap in the face. Instead of comfort, I got cold, calculated justification for my sister's actions. She even told me that if seeing it all hurt so much, I should simply stop looking, that my pettiness was the source of my suffering. Listening to her hurt in ways I couldn't even describe, I couldn't believe my own mother was defending what felt like an outright betrayal. Thankfully, my father, though choosing to stay neutral, didn't support them. He said that for him, what my sister had done was a betrayal too, that he couldn't accept their relationship, even if they were now officially together. He offered me his support, promising to be there for me, but he asked me not to drag him into the conflict, saying that it tore him apart as well. He probably understood the pain of being caught between two daughters, and I respected his decision. But being alone didn't make the burden easier to bear. Everything I once relied on had crumbled. I was truly alone, left without a husband and feeling as if I'd lost my family too. My sister, once someone I trusted and loved, was now a stranger, a source of my deepest pain. My mother had chosen to ignore my suffering, justifying it in the name of happiness. My father, the only one who showed compassion, had distanced himself to keep from breaking. Each day became a struggle, just to keep myself together, to try to find solid ground again. My life had become a series of boxes filled with memories and a loneliness I couldn't shake. Social media, once a place to share joy, had become a torment, reminding me of those who had betrayed me. I deleted all my accounts except Reddit, the one place where I could express my feelings and find support from strangers who, despite the virtual distance, felt closer than my own family. Ahead of me lay a new chapter. Selling the house, moving to a small place to start. Just when I thought I'd reached the end of this nightmare, one final devastating blow struck me. I had begun to settle into my new place, small but safe, away from the haunting memories of our old home. I tried to focus on healing, though the wounds were still fresh. Every day was a battle, but I kept telling myself that the worst was over, that I'd somehow find peace in my own way. Then, one evening, I received a call from my father, his voice trembling in a way I'd never heard before. He struggled to get the words out, but eventually he told me the truth. My mother and my sister had been planning something behind my back. They had arranged for my ex-husband and sister to move into my childhood home, the one where my parents still lived, the house filled with memories of a time when family meant something to me. My mother, in her twisted desire to support my sister's happiness, had welcomed them into the house I once called home. The news hit me like a tidal wave. The very place where I'd spent my childhood, surrounded by love and security, was now going to be their new home. My mother had effectively erased me from the family, welcoming in the two people who had torn my life apart. She was not only supporting their relationship, she was giving them the very space that had once held so much meaning for me. The betrayal was so deep, so raw, that it left me speechless. I confronted my mother, my voice shaking with rage and pain. I asked her how she could do this to me, how she could choose them over me, how she could take the one place where I felt rooted and give it to them. Her response was cold, almost dismissive. She said I needed to move on and that my sister's happiness was her priority now. She insisted that my pain was self-inflicted, that if I hadn't been petty or jealous, none of this would have affected me so deeply. To her, I was just an obstacle to be brushed aside. My father, caught in the middle, tried to reason with her, but it was clear that he had no power in this situation. He told me he was heartbroken, that he wished things were different, but he didn't know how to change them. He promised me he'd always be there for me, but his words felt empty against the overwhelming betrayal of my own mother and sister. In the end, I was left with nothing. No family, no husband, no home. The people I thought would stand by me, the family I'd loved all my life, had chosen to erase me. And there was nothing I could do but walk away from the ruins of my life, knowing that the people I had trusted most had turned their backs on me. Now, I am truly alone. After the revelation that my own mother had opened the doors of my childhood home to my ex-husband and sister, my world felt completely devoid of any meaning or security. It was as if every foundation I'd ever known was ripped out from under me, leaving me to fall into an endless void of betrayal and loneliness. I tried to stay composed in the days that followed, but my mind was flooded with memories and painful thoughts. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see images of them together, laughing in the house where I grew up. I could imagine them filling it with their own memories, erasing mine as if I had never existed in that space. I knew it was irrational, but I couldn't shake the thought that they were trying to erase me from my own family. The silence from my father only made things worse. I wanted to believe he supported me, that he truly understood the depth of my pain, but his words seemed hollow, a weak consolation against the crushing reality. It became clear that he too was caught in my mother's decision and couldn't do anything to change it. He became like a ghost in my life, unable to offer the comfort or protection I desperately craved. It was as if I had lost him too. Days turned into weeks, and I tried to rebuild, but the weight of what had happened grew heavier with each passing day. I kept asking myself questions that had no answers. Why had my mother sided with them? Why hadn't my father fought harder for me? And why did my own sister, someone I once loved and trusted, feel the need to so cruelly flaunt her victory? These questions haunted me day and night, turning my grief into a constant ache. Then one day I received a letter in the mail. It was a formal invitation. A wedding invitation. My hands shook as I opened it, already knowing what I would find inside. It was from my sister and my ex-husband, announcing their engagement. They were getting married and they had invited me to the ceremony. The invitation felt like a mockery, as if they were taunting me, daring me to confront the depths of their betrayal. I couldn't understand how they could be so callous. After everything they'd done, they still wanted me to witness the final act of their union, to stand by as they exchanged vows in front of the very family that had once been mine. I imagined my mother proudly watching her new favourite daughter marry the man who was supposed to be my husband. And my father, would he just sit silently, once again unable to do anything, watching me suffer? The thought of attending their wedding made me feel physically ill. I couldn't bear the idea of seeing them together, surrounded by the people who were supposed to be my support system. It felt like an invitation to my own emotional execution. I threw the invitation in the trash, swearing that I would never allow myself to be subjected to such a heartless display. But the wound it left was deep, and it only grew as the wedding day approached. I found myself isolating even further, retreating from friends and any social connection. I was terrified someone would mention it, or worse, asked me if I was planning to attend. The night before the wedding, I received another call from my father. His voice was filled with hesitation, as if he too was struggling with his emotions. He told me he wanted to see me, to talk things over before the wedding. I was reluctant. I didn't know if I could handle hearing anything more. But a part of me held on to a sliver of hope that maybe, just maybe, he would finally take my side. When we met, his face was etched with worry and regret. He looked at me, searching for the right words, but I could see his own inner conflict. He explained that he had tried to convince my mother not to attend, that he had begged her to reconsider her support for my sister. But she had refused, dismissing his concerns and insisting that it was time for the family to move on. He said he was torn, that he didn't want to lose either of his daughters, but he couldn't stand the thought of hurting my sister by refusing to attend. His words crushed me. Even as he tried to apologise, to explain his position, I could feel the last thread of my trust in him unravelling. I realised then that he would always be caught between us, unable to truly stand up for me, no matter how much he might claim to understand my pain. In the end, I told him that I couldn't forgive him. Not for his choice to support my sister, not for his refusal to fully stand by me. I told him I needed distance, that I couldn't continue to be a part of a family that had chosen to betray me so thoroughly. He tried to argue, to convince me that he was doing his best, but his words felt empty. I walked away from him that night, feeling more alone than I had ever felt in my life. It was as if my family had vanished, replaced by strangers who didn't care about my pain. I knew that I had to leave, to remove myself from the toxic cycle that had consumed my life. The next morning I packed my belongings and drove out of town, leaving everything behind. I decided that I would start fresh, somewhere far from the memories that haunted me. I knew it would be difficult, that the wounds would take time to heal, but I also knew that I couldn't continue living in the shadow of betrayal. As I drove away, a sense of calm washed over me. I was free from the lies, the manipulation, the heartbreak. It was just me now, standing on my own, with no one to answer to, no one to hurt me. It wasn't the life I had imagined, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope.